Our host for today is Ms. Bilquis Mir. She is an IB/DP student at TNS Beacon House and head of book club. She's a member of National English Honors Society and an avid reader of many renowned authors, including Jeffrey Archer, whose fast-paced, thrilling novels she finds particularly enjoyable. She's also a frequent contributor to the school newspaper. Over to Ms. Bilquis Mir now.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Our guest for today's session is internationally renowned literary icon and former member of the House of Commons, Mr. Jeffrey Archer. With sales of over 275 million copies in 97 countries and 51 languages, he is the only author to have been a #1 bestseller in fiction, short stories, and nonfiction. His latest novel, Next in Line, is the latest of the William Morrick series and was recently published in September 2022. The Times called Mr. Archer the greatest storyteller of our age. If you have any questions for Mr. Archer, kindly note them on the flashcards available with the ushers for the Q&A at the end of the interview. Moving on. Our interviewer this afternoon is Mr. Iqbal Zafaruddin Ahmed, a noted businessman and philanthropist. He has pioneered green initiatives in Port Qasim by planting over 50,000 mangrove saplings and has supported the arts, education, and clean drinking water initiatives. Mr. Ahmed presently serves as the chairman of SIMS, Services Institute of Medical Sciences, and the LLF, Lahore Literary Festival. He is also a trustee of the Fazkar Foundation. Thank you for being here, Mr. Iqbal. Over to you, sir.
Jeffrey Howard Archer, the greatest storyteller of all time. His varied experience in life, unparalleled by any other writer that I can think of, and perhaps you can think of. What made him Jeffrey Archer? What made him, or what are his thoughts, and what is his processes, and how does he write? What are the intuitions that he has when he writes? Well, he's 82 and I'm 76, so we are the past generation. But I would certainly like to hear Jeffrey's views on how he thinks the future for all of us. We who are living in the developing countries would very much want to know the way of thinking and where goes tomorrow. Let us know what we can do. What made you Jeffrey Archer? What can we learn from your life? We are all very impressed. These are figures that you have sold over 300 million copies of your publications, 42 books. Each one has been a success, from Cain and Abel, Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, and onward. It's been a success story unparalleled in history. So without any further ado, Jeffrey, and after acknowledging that it is one of the greatest honors of my life to be able to speak to you, I would let you move forward and tell us your story. Thank you.
Be with you today. It's an interesting question you've raised, and I see several young people in the audience. And it makes me say that I will aim a lot of my remarks towards them, because I think at the age of 82, looking back on a career as a writer, I would say, frankly, there is no substitute for damned hard work. It doesn't really matter how talented you are. If you're not willing to put the work in, you will not succeed. I always say you should go to the ballet. And people say, why should I go to the ballet, Jeffrey? And I say, because you'll see the prima ballerina on the stage, and you will know from how brilliant she is that how many hours she must have put in to be the prima ballerina. And then you will look behind the prima ballerina, and you will see the young dancers behind her who have worked just as many hours just to be on the stage with her. And then you have to think about all the thousands of young women who would love to be on the stage, but won't make it. It's no different for writers. If you want to be number one on the New York Times bestsellers list, you have to put in the same amount of hours as the prima ballerina. Now, I'm bound to admit that the art of storytelling is different to writing. Anyone who's had a good education, anyone who's well-read, should be able to write well. But storytelling is a God-given gift. I was never going to be a ballet dancer, but I was given this remarkable opportunity with the gift of being able to tell a story. So all of you who want to achieve something, all the young people here who want to achieve something, will have to realize, first you try and work out what that talent is and where it will take you. But secondly, there is no substitute for hard work. I rise at 5:30 in the morning. I do a 2-hour writing session from 6 until 8. I take a 2-hour break. I do a second 2-hour writing session from 10 until 12. I take a 2-hour break. I do a third writing session from 2 until 4. I take a 2-hour break. I do a final writing session of the day between 6 and 8 in the evening, and after a light supper, go to bed around 9:30, 10, up again at 5:30 the next morning. The first draft takes me about 45 days, 300 hours, and it is the first draft. The latest book, Next in Line, which is part of the William Warwick series, the book you have in front of you is the 14th draft. I wish there was a shortcut. I wish age had taught me how to make it easier, but it hasn't. I'm afraid a lot of people finish a book. They've done it once and they think they're finished, and they hand it in, and they're disappointed by the fact that some people think it's not quite good enough. So don't show a book you've written to anyone until you're satisfied it's the best you can do. In my own case, my first book was called Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less, and it was rejected by 16 publishers, turned down, letters saying, good try, but not good enough. The 17th publisher, Jonathan Cape, decided to publish it, but they only printed 3,000 copies. And it took a year to sell those 3,000 copies. And the second book, they printed 8,000 copies. Shall we tell the president? But my big breakthrough in your country, indeed all over the world, was when I wrote a book called Cain and Abel. That changed my life overnight. 1 million copies were sold worldwide in the first week, and it's now on its 132nd reprint. Now, the point here is you mustn't give up if things don't go too well to begin with. Because if you're a brand new author, you have to find an audience, and then you have to build an audience. And if you've done well, they'll come back to you for the next book. So if you're determined to be a writer, or you want to be a writer, or you want to know about writing, don't assume you're going to be a big hit overnight. That does happen, but it's very, very rare. The normal way is an author builds up over the years until they're established. And I suspect, looking at that audience, and I can see some very intelligent looking young women, they'll take this in. And the next thing you have to remember is that your country has the reputation for damned hard work, and now producing a generation which is very exciting, really innovative and exciting. So you have a good chance now. And I go back to the women in the audience, if I may. I'm married to a very remarkable woman. My wife chaired one of England's great hospitals, Cambridge University Trust Hospital. And she won Hospital of the Year twice in her last 3 years as chairman, and the Queen made her a Dame. So she's now Dame Mary. And she became the chairman of the Science Museum in Great Britain, the first woman ever to chair a national gallery or museum. Now, you young women sitting in that audience, you have much more opportunity. Many more doors are open. And there's no need for you to be frightened of any man. You can go and beat them any day of the week. And good luck to you. So that my career has gone on. I'm now 82 years old. And I sit here with, considering I've had a wonderful and privileged life, I still, which is important, I still enjoy writing. I still get a kick out of it, still a thrill. If it stopped, I can tell you, I would stop. But I'm not going to stop. Now, I've learned over the years, with every different audiences all over the world. Last week I was speaking to a Canadian audience, an American audience, an Australian audience, and now I'm with you today. I've learned over the years that it's from the questions I really learn what you would like to know about. So with your permission, I will throw this open to receive questions. But thank you very much indeed for allowing me to address you.
Jeff, you started writing about 40 years ago at a young age. You had many successful careers. You have been a politician, you have been an elected representative, you have been a peer, you had your share of problems, and you have been a philanthropist. How were you able to mix all these careers together? And then you also told us about your schedule, daily schedule. Does it give you time to concentrate on other things, or now are you totally dedicated and committed to writing?
At the moment, I have to admit that my life is pretty well full-time writing. I have a hobby, which is charity auctioneering. I'm a show-off. I love being on the center of the stage. So, and auctioneering gives me the opportunity to raise money for some wonderful charities. And over the years, I've raised £72 million for different charities, and that's my hobby. I also love the theatre, and I'm a collector of art. So that's what I've most enjoyed doing. But you're quite right in asking the question, how do you concentrate on more than one thing at once? You're quite right. I was distracted after about 7 books. Margaret Thatcher rang me up and asked me to come and be the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party and run the constituencies for the next general election. And I couldn't resist it. I couldn't resist her, and I couldn't resist it. And so I had an amazing time, 11 years working for Margaret Thatcher, which I don't regret, because out of it came many stories, and I met many fascinating and interesting people. And if you're going to tell a story, if you're going to write a book, you need to meet people. You need to mix. I mean, if you look at an author like Arcane Orion, who I'm a huge admirer of, you will see that his ability to tell you about ordinary people, to tell you about people he's met, is an amazing gift. And he taught me that the more people you meet, the more you can mix, the more you will have something to put on paper.
Wonderful. When do you get the time to actually think about your next book or your next plot? Because your writing is very varied. It is now it has become more a thriller writing and a very complicated plots. And, there have been very complicated plots in some of the books. Over the ages, it is becoming bolder, better, and more complicated. What has been the influence in making that? Has the sale of books or the type of books which you wrote influenced the next stories, or how do you select what you're writing? Is it a dream that you get and you wake up in the morning and start writing, or is that something better than that?
You mustn't be influenced by what you described as the sale of the books. Every one of you in that audience who is thinking of writing a short story, writing an essay, writing a book, must write about something you know about. Don't write about violence because that's selling books. Don't write ghost stories because that's selling books. Don't use bad language because that's selling books. Don't use sex stories because that's selling books. Do what you are at ease with. Look at Jane Austen. Look at Charles Dickens. They told a story and you had to turn the page. So do what suits you. And if the public like it, and certainly if it's something you know about, they will know you know about it. So whatever suits you, and hope the page will be turned. In answer to the second part of your question, ideas come all the time. I can't stop them. Every day of my life, ideas come. And once the first draft, which is pretty well the basic story, has been finished, yes, one does add sentences, one does add paragraphs, one does add new ideas, but the basic story is in the brain the day I pick up the pen on January the 1st every year and move it for the first time. Sometimes I know 2 or 3 pages ahead, if I'm lucky. A chapter would be remarkable because sometimes the book takes you in a different direction. So if you plan it right the way through, you'll suddenly find you've gone off there when you were meant to go off there. So that doesn't work for me. I know a few pages, and frankly, I then pray. And I've been very, very lucky because I've never had writer's block. I've never not got to the end, but I've equally never had a letter in 46 years saying, "Dear Jeffrey, I knew exactly how it was going to end." If I don't know how it's going to end, how can you know how it's going to end?
Another question I have for you is, the world's biggest selling author ever, many careers, many careers, something to be proud of in everything you have attempted. How does it feel? Does it make you humble, or does it make you an egoist?
It makes you worried because every time you sit down for the next book, you think, you've sold 275 million books around the world. You better not let them down. Maybe that's another reason I do 14 drafts every time. It's another, no, so the answer to your question, it's very humbling at one level. And I'll tell you why. If you decide today to go and watch a film, that'll take you a couple of hours. If you decide to Twitter a bit or bash around on the phone, that'll take you 30 minutes. If you go and see a play or an opera, it'll make it 2, possibly 3 hours. But if you commit to a book, you're committing probably to at least 8 hours. So I feel very privileged when someone tells me they've read one of my books and discusses it with me, because I know how long they've had to put aside to read my book. So any author, frankly, is privileged to have one reader, let alone millions. So every single time I'm aware, conscious how lucky I am, and it drives me to try even harder. I'm currently in the middle of a series called the William Warwick series, the story of a detective, a young boy when he leaves school, wants to become a detective. And I'm determined to write 8 books with this young man. He starts as a constable in the Metropolitan Police Force, and you follow his life through 8 different books, and all 8 will be separate. But the first one was about art fraud. The second one was about drugs. The third one was about police corruption. The fourth one was about murder. And the one I'm working on at the moment, next in line, which has just come out, is about royalty protection, and in particular, the protection of Princess Diana. Now, I had the privilege and honor of working with Princess Diana as an auctioneer, as a charity auctioneer, and we became friends over the years. Indeed, she asked me to be with her on the day she withdrew from public life, when she made that famous speech about withdrawing from public life. She asked me to be with her, so we became friends over the years. And 25 years later, this particular William Warwick book, next in line, was about royalty protection. So I decided to make her the subject and to have one of my police officers, not William, Mr. Ross, Inspector Ross, Ross Hogan, would be her personal protection officer. So I remembered the personal protection officer who worked with Princess Diana when I knew her. So I went to see him and listened to all the stories and remembered many of them because I'd been involved in them. So she is the center of the book. And what you have to decide, if you read it, is how much of it is true and how much of it I made up.
And that is what makes your writing very interesting. Because I have this feeling that in many of the books you have intermingled truths with fiction. And because the truth is based on your experiences or your hearsay, that makes it very fascinating. And that is one reason which I believe is responsible for the sales of your books. So tell us, how do you do that? Where does the truth mingle with fiction? And how do you do it?
You've got to be careful because I'm not in the game of offending people. I'm in the game, I'm an entertainer. I want you to turn the page. So if you've worked with Margaret Thatcher or you've worked with Princess Diana and you intermingle it, sometimes you make it up because you can't always know the conversations they've had with a particular person. And sometimes it's accurate because you were there and you experienced it. And the secret, if I dare to answer your question, the secret is you've got to intermingle it in a way so that the reader doesn't know which it is.
That is very, very impressive. And how are you seeing now your next decade? How many books are you going to write?
Well, I'm 82.
So
I'm halfway through.
I'm asking
The
for your
William
plan.
Warwick.
I'm asking
I've
for your
got
plan.
to 86 to
I'm-
finish the William Warwicks. So all of you in the audience, start praying.
I'm asking for your plans of up to 92.
Well, as I say, royalty protection is the next one, which you have in the bookshops now. The one I'm working on at the moment is called A Queen's Ransom and is about something that happens with Queen Elizabeth II and the royal family. I do know the vague subject of the one after because he goes into diplomatic protection. And the one after that, I know the subject is the Olympic Games and the problems the police face in the Olympic Games. But that's 83, 84, 85. So please don't ask me what I'm going to do at 86, because I might not be here.
We'll hope and pray that you'll be there, and you'll be there to entertain us for many more years. But Jeffrey, what I would like to know is, you've had your share of problems and your share of fame and your share of privilege and honor. What makes you tick? What makes Jeffrey Archer? What led you in life to become what you are?
Well, I would say on that, the most important thing when you're in trouble, and you're quite right, I've had troubles, and everyone in the audience during their lives will have problems and will have troubles. Where I got very lucky is a wonderful wife and a wonderful family. When you're at your lowest, if they are still there, I mean, I was in debt 40 years ago for 400,000 when I wrote Not a Penny More, Not a Penny Less. And the advance was 3,000. Now, even the weakest mathematicians in the audience can take 3,000 from 400,000 and see that it wasn't, it didn't make much of a dent. It wasn't until Cain and Abel, when it went absolutely wild, that I went back into being what one might call nouveau riche. So yes, with problems, I would say, if you're very lucky, you'll find the right partner. You'll have a good, strong family behind you. And then when things go wrong, you have a solid base. If you don't have that, I agree, it would be a problem. And I would say to you, what makes me tick? I'm very energetic. I'm very enthusiastic. I always believe I can do the next thing. And I've a string of wonderful friends and family who have stood by me in good times and in bad.
So the strength comes from real relationships, from hardcore relationships which are sustainable, your wife, your children, your true friends. What about your friendships? You told us about Princess Diana. We know how much respect Margaret Thatcher had for you. Who else have you dealt with in life? And what have you learned from them?
Well, I love my sport. So I suspect there'll be one or two in the audience who love their sport. So I've learned a lot from the game of cricket and the people I've met over the years. I began life at Oxford. I was a runner myself. My first love was cricket. I always wanted to captain the England cricket team. It was a minor disadvantage that I couldn't bat, bowl, or field, and so I became a runner. But over the years have made many, many friends in the cricketing world, particularly on your continent, because you play the game so brilliantly. So whether it be the Nawab of Patodi, who I was at Oxford with, or Imran Khan, who came to see me because he wanted to go into politics when I was a young member of parliament. So meeting those sort of people, I think the game of cricket teaches you too certain standards, certain things that are right and wrong. So sport has played a great role in my life, and I commend it to anyone, particularly in your country, because you're so damn good at it. But that's one of the features. And other friends, well, do you know, you don't have to have rich and famous friends. You have decent friends. I could name so many people that you would never have heard of. But they've been good friends over the years. They've been loyal and honest and decent. And they're the ones you cling on to most. So, yes, I've had the privilege of meeting Mother Teresa. I've had the privilege of meeting Mandela. I've had the privilege of working with Margaret Thatcher and Princess Diana. But I can name a lot more simple, decent people who've influenced me every bit as much.
Do you consider politics to be an honorable profession?
Well, I think one of the sad things is when I first went into it 50 years ago, it was very, very respected and very honorable. I think today it's changed a lot. And one of the sad things is there are some thoroughly decent people in politics. They don't get noticed because of the crooks, criminals, thieves, and others who try to get in as well. But you know, I was a guest last night at the Indian High Commission, and I saw three British politicians there, three of the finest men I've ever met in my life. Why are they never mentioned in the press? Because they don't do anything wrong. The press loves someone who does something wrong, and they can have big headlines about what they've done. Not all politicians are bad. Not all doctors are good. Not all lawyers are good. Not all architects are good. But the answer to your question is, it's you're the person you are. If you are honorable, that's fine. Don't assume that every single person who wishes to give service, therefore, isn't honorable.
Interesting. How are you seeing from your perspective, because you are a writer, to write you have to read, and to read you have to have a wide lens for understanding things. How do you see that the emerging countries or the developing countries will fare in today's economic conditions, and the impact the current energy crisis, the current world situation have on the development of the population, on the growth of population, mental growth of the population in our countries like us? And what is the key for us forward? What would be, apart from hard work, what would be your key advice to people like us from Pakistan, and particularly to the youth of Pakistan?
Well, when I look at that audience again, I see what I see in Pakistan, I see what I see in India. When I see rows of young women with incredibly bright, intelligent faces, they are going to take over the world. That's the first thing I'll tell you. We've got to wake up. We've now got, in Britain, we've now got an Indian Prime Minister in Great Britain. Because why? He's blooming bright. He did an MBA at Harvard, and he's already been Financial Secretary and Chancellor of the Exchequer by the age of 42. So if I live to 160, I think you're fine. The whole place is run by you lot, and I will just be collecting my old age pension. But on to the more serious part of your question. We do live in a very troubled world. We're currently facing a recession, and what we have to make sure in every country is that it doesn't affect, I'm talking as an 82-year-old, it doesn't affect our grandchildren, that they are perpetually in debt because of our mistake. We must make sure that doesn't happen, number one. Number two, what is happening in Ukraine is terrible. I mean, Putin is as evil as Stalin. He's as evil as Hitler. He's just sent 200,000 more young people to the front line to fight Ukraine, and they're not even trained. So they will die. They will be killed because of this thoroughly evil man who doesn't care how many people die as long as he thinks he's won. Well, he's not going to win, and he's a bad man. And I'm happy to say that I think about a third of the Russian people have now worked it out. 1/3 aren't sure, and 1/3 are brainwashed. But we must admire the great courage of the Ukrainian people to take on a battle which is our battle. Because if Putin wins this battle, who will be next? So the young people in your audience are facing many new problems. And none of us want evil dictators as our leaders. We want strong, decent, honest people. And that man, Putin, is as evil as they come. I quite happily couple him with Hitler and with Stalin as a man who doesn't care how many people die as long as he gets what he wants. That's a massive problem for the next generation. Then you have, and taking another extreme, putting that on one side if one can, the people in the audience who are listening to me today, those young people in the audience listening to me today, you're going to live to 100. We assume, when I was a young man, you assumed that you sort of retired at 65 and you conveniently died at 70. Those days are gone. My wife is 77 and she's running the Science Museum. I'm 82 and you've just got my latest book. Your generation will live to 100 and you'll have to get ready for that. Gone are the days when people make way at 65 for the next generation. You'll have to work out how it's possible to have a world in which people go on working for much longer. And you'll have to work out how to pay their retirement, how to pay their pensions, how it's going to be a whole new, it's already started, but it's going to be a whole new world. But it's your generation who are going to have to face those problems. I've been very lucky. I was born at the end of the Second World War. I was born in 1940, and by the time the war ended, I was 6 years old. So I never had a world war. And COVID came along when I was 78 years old. So it was a fairly golden generation for my generation. You have new problems, new things to worry about, and it isn't going to be any easier. Now, some things are more wonderful. Our health is better. We're living to a greater age because of drugs, because of excellent doctors. We're having better chance, but that will bring with it its own problems. And I envy you at one level, sitting in that audience and saying, I'm going to be part of that. And in another way, I don't, because I can't see, to answer your question, I can't see what's going to, things change so quickly nowadays. I can't see where we'll be in 30 years' time.
Thank you for that. Before I hand over to the audience for questions, Bilquis will be doing that portion. One last question. Give us a magic wand by which we can make the world more inclusive and more equitable.
I wish it could be done with a magic wand. The trouble is that I listened to part of the peaceful discussion that was going on among the four panel earlier and couldn't agree more. If you are able to love rather than hate, if you're able to give rather than take, you'll have a better world. But we all know there are some pretty unpleasant people out there who are more interested in themselves than other people. But I, in the end, remain optimistic. In my life, I've met so many wonderful people who give service, love their country, will work for it, that I remain optimistic. And I think the next generation is actually the most exciting I've ever seen. And I wish you all in Pakistan the chance to make things better. All I would say to you is, if you see something is wrong, have the courage to say so. The mistakes that are happening in Russia, the mistakes that happened in Germany so many years ago, were because decent, middle-class, well-educated people didn't stand up and do something about it. Do something if you think something is wrong.
Well, Jeffrey, it's been an honor talking to you. As always, you've come out strong and clear-minded, clear-headed. Thank you for all that you have said. And I will now like to invite Bilquis to take questions from the audience and present them to you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Before I continue on to the audience Q&A, Mr. Archer, I had a couple of questions for you myself. You mentioned that you are going to write 8 novels in the William Morrick series. Why is that? Do you always decide how many novels you'll write in a series, like in the Clifton Chronicles?
No, I've never. No, I've never decided before. The Clifton Chronicles started off as 3, then I thought it was going to be 5, and then Emma and Harry were only 45 at the end of the 5th book, so they ended up as 7. But with this one, I've always decided that he would go from constable to sergeant to inspector to chief inspector to superintendent to chief superintendent to commander to commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. So it was the ranks that decided how many books there would be. And I then thought I'll have 8 different subjects, 8 different ranks. And if I remind you, because you clearly weren't listening to the earlier part of this question, I will be 86 when I get to book 8. So please don't ask me what I'm going to do after that.
Well, I am going to ask you, what continues to drive your literary aspirations? I mean, you're still doing this at your age. Why?
It's not an easy question to answer, but I would say to you very politely, without any vanity at all. I'm proud, but I'm not vain. If you continue to go to number 1 on bestsellers lists in 97 countries, in 41 languages, it makes you get out of bed in the morning. So I've been very, very lucky.
You also mentioned previously you struggled before you released Cain and Abel, which was your hit in 1979. What do you think was the success factor behind that?
Do you know, I wish I knew. I wrote the book. It got auctioned in America and sold for 3,200,000. And those of you who've been paying attention will remember I was in debt for 400,000. So it kind of changed my life overnight. In fact, I was able to buy the house. I'm sitting in my wife's study at the moment, but I'm able to buy the house I'm living in and have lived in for the last 40 years. But if you had said to me, Jeffrey, 1 million people will read it in the first week, I just wouldn't have believed you. If you'd said to me, you're now on the 132nd edition of Cain and Abel, and it's the 11th most successful book in history. No, how could I possibly know that? And the answer to your question is I haven't got a blooming clue, but I'm very grateful.
My last question is, art and literature are both forms of expression. In 2020, Paul Cox illustrated your recent short story collection, The Short, the Long, and the Tall. Do you feel that art and literature are intertwined?
Well, I think talent in the art world is. I love the theatre. I love good writing, so I love books, and I love art. And I think if that's the world you're in, you should try to broaden your interests all the time. I confess, my wife has a great knowledge of opera and music, which I don't have, and I envy her. But partly it's because I love the theatre, love art, and so we have slightly differing interests. But yes, I would say to any person, I mean, I'll tell you the truth about the art. At the age of, I think I was 16, I fell in love with a girl called Jill, who was going to go to university and study art. And the only way I could get to see her, because she wasn't that interested in me, was to troop around art galleries with her. And then I fell out of love with her and fell in love with the art. And the art's been going on now for 70 years. I've been loving the art. So I became a collector. I have a little knowledge, and my 2 closest friends, Chris Beatles and Simon Bainbridge, are real experts on art. So having their friendship for 60 years has made my knowledge quite good. And I steal from them all the time and then put it in the books.
I'd like to move on to the Q&A session. The first question from the audience is, what have you learned over 82 years, meeting so many wise people? What do you think is the essence of life?
Gosh, that's an almost impossible question to answer. But I would say, if you give more than you receive, you'll be surprised how beneficial it is.
Why have you had a go at every style of writing? You've written novels, plays, children's books. Did you vacillate between different styles, or was it a conscious choice that you made?
No, sometimes when I collect short stories from real human beings. Whenever I'm traveling around the world, people tell me stories. And just occasionally, one of them's a little bit of magic. I would say out of the 92 short stories I've written, that 60 have come from people telling me an incident, telling me something that happened in their life. People don't have a novel. It's not true. Everyone has a novel in them. That's not true. But everyone has a damn good short story. And they probably don't even know they have it themselves because it's part of their life. And they take it for granted. But while I'm out there looking, I sometimes get some amazing short stories. Plays, I wrote 3 plays because I love the theatre. I wrote 3 short stories because when my children were, my 2 sons were 5 and 7, they were going to school and everybody was saying, they're the children of the man who wrote Cain and Abel. And so they obviously they couldn't read Cain and Abel at the age of 5. So I had to sit down and write 3 short stories especially for them. And I never meant them to be published in anywhere. And it's been a big shock that they've been a big success because I wrote them 40 years ago. So yes, you're quite right. I've had a dabble at everything, but the thing I love most is the novel. That is the biggest challenge, to make you turn the page, to make you want to go on, to keep you guessing the whole time until the very last page. It's the novel that I enjoy most.
In your opinion, which would be that one book that can lead the women of today on the right direction?
Why women of today? Why not men as well?
It was an audience question.
There must be 1 or 2 men in that audience. Stop being so chauvinistic. Much as I love women, men have a right to be equal as well. The answer to what was the question? Sorry, what was the question? What would I advise the women of today? Well, you've never had a better opportunity. When I was a young man, I'll give you an example. How many of you seen on the television the Chinese leader being elected for the 3rd time? There he is, standing in front of rows and rows and rows and rows of what? Men. Be thankful you're in a country where women are now gaining equality. It's very important to tell these other countries who think women are second class to wake up, particularly the United States, who still haven't had a woman president. Are you telling me in 300 million people they haven't got a woman better than Donald Trump or Biden? I don't believe it. So yes, there's a great opportunity for women, and grab it. Assume you're as good, if not better, than every man you come up against, because the world is going to be yours. But men in the audience, don't give up.
Any favorite authors, Mr. Archer?
I do have one particular author who I admire tremendously. He was an Austrian Jew who escaped from Hitler. His name is Stefan Zweig. I think Beware of Pity. He only wrote 2 novels. He committed suicide because he thought Hitler was going to win the war. He was the biggest bestseller in the world in 1945, 46, 47. He then fell out of fashion and he's now come back. And I think he is acknowledged as one of the great writers of all time. So Stefan Zweig would be my #1 hero. When I grow up, and I'm still looking forward to that, when I grow up, I want to be Stefan Zweig.
Last question. Do you think English storytelling is degenerating or just changing as all things do?
Well, I think it moves with the times. If you look at Dickens dominating that great Victorian era, they're stories of the time. And we all move with the time, and you come through to the modern day. I have to write about modern politics, modern big business, modern art, whatever it might be. And so you write what you need to write at the time. And frankly, you pray that the public will enjoy it, because in the end, you know, there's only one person who decides whether you will be a best-selling author. That's the public. They decide. You can put posters up. You can go on television. You can advertise. But if the book's no damn good, the public won't buy it. They're not that stupid. You have to deliver every single time.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. On behalf of Beacon House, I thank Mr. Jeffrey Archer and Mr. Iqbal Z. Ahmed, along with our audience, for participating in SOT Edition 15, Guardians of the Future. Please share your feedback regarding this session via an email you will receive from the SOT team. Do also visit our immersive art exhibit, Coexist, Co-Exit, and our Classrooms of Tomorrow exhibits spread across the venue. We also thank our lead sponsor, United Bank Limited, for their continued support, as well as our other sponsors, without whom it would not be possible for us to bring this event to you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
I'd like to say thank you as well. Thank you very much for the privilege of allowing me to address you, and may I wish all of you good luck in the future. Thank you.